My name's Toby Musgrave and welcome to this presentation on what is a garden. Now, if you go and look in 4 or 5 different dictionaries, you're going to get 4 or 5 different definitions of what a garden is. So I'd like to give you mine. First of all, the ornamental garden. With a continuous and continuing global history of almost 4,000 years, the ornamental garden is a barometer of civilization. You need peaceful conditions in which to make gardens. It's an overlooked, yet complex, three-dimensional, site-specific, organic and dynamic artwork that contains elements of landforming, sculpture, architecture and ornamental plants. And what about the productive garden or the vegetable garden? Regarded by some as less glamorous, the productive garden has an equally wide geographical distribution, i.e. global, a longer history still reaching back to Neolithic times, and has had and continues to have a significant socio-cultural impact. For example, it was the development of heating systems for greenhouses in the early part of the 19th century that led to the central heating systems we have in houses today. Thank you. So I'd like to go through a few aspects of what I think a garden is. Now, I'm not trying to give you a garden history of 4,000 years in a few minutes. That would just be trying to skate over the surface too foolishly, and we would not even plunge in and get any information out of that. So I think it'd be nice to explore the garden from a few different aspects. Now, the first thing I think about gardens is that they're an incredibly egalitarian space. People all over the world, doesn't matter which culture, which time zone, which frame we're looking at, which era we're looking at, people have always made gardens. And by people, I mean people. I'm talking secular and lay, I'm talking wealthy and poor, I'm talking young and old. It is one of those very few all-embracing activities that are also great fun and bring pleasure to people. The slide you're seeing here is just the Chelsea Flower Show, and every year that place is sold out. You can't get tickets. It's like trying to get a ticket to go see Bruce Springsteen. It doesn't matter what day you go on, it's absolutely packed. And again, the range of people there just covers the entire social spectrum. So gardening is a fantastically levelling and embracing activity and art form. Gardens are also a work of art, but I would say they're also a very neglected form of art. You go and look in any art history texts and you'll be lucky to find any reference to gardens. Yet gardens are incredibly important as a form of expression and a detailed form of expression that has been made, again, around the world and down the millennia. And I think it's to our detriment that we don't understand or we don't realise the significant art contribution that garden makes to our culture or everybody else's culture for that matter. So gardens are artworks and they should be treated as such and should be respected as such. And I think it's one of those things that when you go to a garden, we go to gardens and we enjoy walking around gardens, we enjoy the pleasure and the experience of being in gardens. And that's one of the things that's really special about gardens as an artwork. We are players on that stage. Yes, I can stand here and I can show you pictures of gardens. This is Villa d'Este, just outside Rome in the village of Tivoli. Yet to be there is the important thing, to feel the sun on your face, to hear that water moving, to see that water moving, to move amongst the statues and the features. That's what brings the garden to life. And I think knowing a little bit about the story behind the gardens just brings it that much more to life when you're there. So get out there and learn some garden history. Gardens are also a site of cultivation. Now, some definitions of gardens will just be they're a place to grow plants, and that is very much the central role of gardens. So as well as a work of art with sculpture and fountains and what have you, plants are also a form of art. You arrange plants to get a particular effect. They're an ornamental element within a garden, but they're also a reason why you garden. Fountains and statues will do their thing if you just leave them to do it. But if you want your garden to look beautiful, to be a work of art, you need to also actively participate in culture and cultivation of gardening. And that's also where gardens are so nice, because by getting out there, getting your hands dirty, getting back in touch with nature, you just feel so much of a better person. To be honest, after a hard day's work presenting things like this, I love to get back to my garden and pull a few weeds and cut a few slugs. Just makes me feel so much better. Gardens are a place of production. Now, I said that the origins of gardens probably extend back to Neolithic times, and the first gardens would have been places where we grew plants to eat, when we shifted from being a nomadic hunter-gatherer society to a villager society. We needed to grow. And yes, big-scale horticulture is agriculture, but people would have had small gardens around their houses in which they grew vegetables and fruits. And now it's coming back in fashion. It's great. Now we are so into this whole idea of growing our own fruits and vegetables. We can do it organically, we can grow heritage or heirloom varieties, we know the source of our food, we're reducing our carbon footprint, all those good ethical things. And the most important thing as far as I'm concerned is at the end of the day, I go to my garden and I pluck those fruits and vegetables. They're still warm from the sun, they are so fresh and they are so tasty and they are so good for you. So it's a great way to relax, but it's also a great way to improve your lifestyle. But also we can look at vegetable gardening as an art form. This particular slide here is Villandre in France. And here the whole garden is edible, yet it's arranged in a very artistic way. It's a potager, that's the technical term for it. So you can have fun with fruits and vegetables and make a work of art at the same time. So gardens are also a mark of civilization. You need peaceful, stable, calm conditions and an ordered society with a wealth base and a distribution of wealth to be able to make gardens. If you have times of conflict, you don't have gardens. Or if you have times of conflict, you lose gardens. One of the saddest things I think is happening at the moment in the Middle East, in the conflicts in Syria, all around that part of the world, there are some most beautiful Islamic gardens which are just being destroyed because of a conflict zone. Same thing happened in Afghanistan. The same thing has happened in Iraq, with the ISIS destroying even older gardens, the gardens of Mesopotamia. They're rubble. It's just such a shame to see these losses. So where we have gardens, they are a mark of civilization and they should be preserved and conserved as that badge of civilization. Gardens are also very much a component of culture. Doesn't matter where you are in the world or what particular time frame you're looking at. That particular garden form that appears at that particular time is part of that culture of which it was made. So gardens, as works of art, are very much affected by their cultural, societal setting, their zeitgeist, if you like, and they also affect the culture and society. For example, the whole diet in Britain, or the whole way of cooking, changed in the 19th century when gardens, particularly productive gardens, started to do different things with greenhouses, new plant varieties and edible plant varieties were being bred, and so the cuisine changed. I think an excellent example of this is also Islamic gardens. Now, Islamic gardens are based on a blueprint of paradise that's described in the Quran, the Shahr Bagh. Now, that's the basis for all Islamic gardens down the centuries and around the world. Yet, depending on where you are, when the garden was made, they also have a slight difference. That's the cultural identity that that garden has. So the gardens of Al-Andalus, Spanish gardens, they are slightly different from the gardens that were created in North Africa or going into Persia. So although it's an embracing art form within Islam, there is that cultural identity to the Islamic garden depending on the location in which it's created. And I think that's nice. It gives it that variety, that bit of fun. And again, brings the story about that garden to life. Now, gardens are also a component of religion. I'm going to be doing a separate presentation on that, so if you'd like to learn more about that, take a look at that video too. But gardens and plants appear in every single world religion, whether they're still practiced or whether they're now defunct religions, if that's the proper word for an ex-religion. You can understand why, particularly with plants. Plants are useful to us, so you can understand why people would have said that plants are God-given because they are beneficial to us as humans. But we also use gardens as a place of reverence. Within Islam, people go into the garden and use that as a retreat, a haven, a place to examine your relationship with God, a way of looking at your soul within this earthly paradise. The picture here is of Ryoanji, which is a garden in Kyoto, also a religious garden. Looks completely different from an Islamic garden, but this is a meditative tool. It's a dry garden, so there's some gravel that's raked and there's a few rocks with a bit of moss around them, which is an overly simplistic way of talking about it. It's a beautiful artwork as well. But this is a garden where you, as a Buddhist, as a monk, you stare at the garden and you lose yourself in that as a meditative tool. So gardens are an intrinsic part of religions the world over. And I think that's also an interesting statement to make, because it gives an indication of how important we as human beings, regardless of where and when, consider gardens to be. Maybe leading on from the concept of gardens as part of religion, we can also have gardens as memorials. The slide here is of obviously the Taj Mahal, that wonderful, beautiful structure in India. Now, most people consider that the epitome of visiting the Taj Mahal is to go to this building, this white building that glows pearlescent in the morning and golden in the afternoon. But perhaps don't realise that it's actually a memorial. favourite wife of the Emperor Shah Jahan is buried in there. And yet, people also forget that the memorial there is at the centre of a garden. It's the centre of a Shahabad garden, and that garden provides the setting for the mausoleum. Of course, there are other types of memorial gardens on a much smaller scale. I think of the remembrance gardens that accompany the burial sites, the war graves in France, and incredibly moving places to go, small and simply planted, but again, it's providing a setting where people can go and in an environment which is sad, also feel life and joy again. That idea of the recircling of life through plants, I think, is a very important part of gardens and memorials. Gardens are also a stage, a theatre, a place to tell a story. Now, most of us go garden visiting and we go into a garden and we look at it and we go, oh, that's a nice herbaceous border, or I like the fountain they've got there, and it's such a pretty place to go out on a nice day. And then we rush off to the tea rooms and have our cup of tea and a slice of cake or a scone, and we go home thinking what a nice day out we've had, and maybe picked up a few ideas to try in our own garden, and maybe a few plants in the garden centre to plug into the garden when we get home. But oftentimes, these garden art forms also have a message in them. It's incredible to go to a garden, having done a bit of research beforehand, and to see it through a whole different eyes, or have the scales taken away from your eyes. Now, the garden picture here is Bomazzo in Italy. This is an incredible garden. It's also a memorial garden. The chap who made it, his wife died, so he made the garden in her honour. But it's walking into this surreal landscape. And in this case, no one actually fully understands what the message is, but it's very much about loss and love and the sadness associated with the demise of a loved one. But you look at the sculptures and they're the crazy mythical beasts coming up here and popping out of rocks there. And yet we don't know that when we go there. So this garden, landscape gardens in Britain, for example, again, you can have a real message being told within that story of that garden that we don't understand unless we do a little bit of research. And in the olden days, if you were educated and you went to these gardens, you knew exactly what was being told when you went into it. For example, if you went into the landscape at Stowe in the early part of the 18th century or mid-18th century, you would have known that Lord Cobham there was giving you a choice. You were having the choice to go left or right, which was the choice of the Hercules' virtue path, if you like, or you could go on the path of licentious pleasure. Now, if you went on the path of virtue, it was hard work. If you went on the licentious pleasure, you got the pleasure, but it wasn't good for you in the long run. We go there today, and most of us don't realise that, but that's such fun to figure out what the story was going on behind the scenes. That use of garden buildings, garden sculptures, garden allegory to tell an unknown story that if you were educated, and rightly educated at the time, you'd have got it. And nowadays we can do that. We can read up before we go, and it just brings so much more richness to a garden to know the story behind it. Now, gardens have also been a place of conspicuous consumption. I mean, these days, if you want to be super show-off, you buy yourself a Ferrari, or if you're super wealthy, you buy yourself a super yacht. But gardens have always been a place to show off as well. One of the ways you could do that would be to grow the latest, rarest, most unusual, most expensive plants. And this was particularly the case in the 19th century when orchids were the absolute fashion. But down the centuries, again, growing plants, having the biggest landscape, having the latest fashions in your garden was a way of showing off, a display of conspicuous consumption. The slide here is of Chatsworth House in the 19th century, and it's a particular greenhouse that was built for this one particular plant. And this is Victoria Regina. This is the giant water lily from Brazil. And the Duke of Devonshire at the time, the 6th Duke of Devonshire, was a gardening nut and super wealthy, and he wanted to be the first person to have this plant flower in Britain. So he had the greenhouse built. It took him a long time to get the plants. He finally got the plants, and he finally got it to flower. So that was one-upmanship, and of course the first flower was presented to Queen Victoria. Linked in with this idea of gardens being part of culture and part of society, you can say gardens are also a statement of conformity. This has been particularly the case in the 20th century when new suburbs were growing up around the world. So a whole group of people being thrown together in a new environment, houses probably looking pretty much the same, so there was a level of conformity there. And one of the ways you could show that you were part of this new culture and society that was evolving all the time as you were living there was to have a garden that fitted in with what was expected standard of the times, the norms, the cultural norms. This picture is from a book advising new gardeners in new suburbs in Britain between the two world wars, when the garden style was to copy the arts and crafts of Gertrude Jekyll and Edwin Lutyens, hybridise that with the country cottage garden, and have literally your russin herbs, your little bit of countryside in the city in your new suburban home. Now, you could be individualistic in terms of the way you arrange the features within your plot, but if you didn't want to be scorned by your neighbours, you'd made damn sure that the features you used were the ones that everybody else was using, so you fitted in with the culture that was evolving in the suburbs at the time. Nowadays, though, I think we have so many different types of plants. We have so many hundreds of years of garden history to draw on for inspiration. We have an almost infinite palette of different types of materials. So one of the things I think is really exciting about gardening at the moment is that gardens are an expression of individuality. You can basically go out and do what you like in your garden. And I think that's really nice, because to enjoy a garden, you have to enjoy being in it. And if it's an expression of yourself, then it's all the more pleasurable to be in it. And I think gardens are one of those few places where, even if we're not consciously doing it, we are making a creative statement. We make the garden to suit us. And I think that's a really liberating and fun thing to be able to do, that we can make a statement, we can enjoy what we're doing, and by doing that, we get so much more out of our garden. So it's so nice to be gardening at a time when gardens are for individuals. Again, gardens are part of a community. I mentioned the idea of memorial gardens, and also those are places which sometimes became sites of pilgrimage. Certainly the Mughal emperor tombs became such. But I think in current society as well, this idea of community works at a whole range of different levels. Now, people can get together and decide to make a little urban garden, a guerrilla garden, to grow their own vegetables. It brings people together, it gets families out and about and meets their neighbours, and that's only a good thing. But there's a bigger picture here as well. A lot of places around the world now, people are moving, migrations are happening, people are moving to new locations. And the idea of the garden as this embracing place, coming back to this egalitarian idea, also helps people integrate. You work in a city, all your neighbours come from different parts of the world, and if there's a community garden there, people can come together on neutral turf, meet on neutral ground, start to understand each other a little bit better. And that is great for community spirit and for integration. So gardens are a real leveller and a real embracer, and that's just got to be a positive thing. And just coming back to what I think about gardening, doesn't matter what style it is, gardens have to be places of joy. I recently put my students a test and I said to them, 500 words please, I want your definition of a garden. I got different answers from all of them, but all of them had one thing in common. Gardens were positive places. They always had an association of pleasure, of great memories, of childhood, doing things with their parents, visiting gardens. So gardens have this ability to bring us pleasure, bring us joy. They're an escape from the everyday world. They're a place where we can relax, where we can escape. And so needed these days. We live in ever more frenetic times, ever more stressful times. You turn on the news and your blood pressure goes up. It's just one of those places where we can get out, just be in a healthy space. We're outdoors, we're being healthy, we're gardening. It's a bit of exercise, although your back might not think so at the end of the day. But we are also doing what we as species did thousands and thousands of years ago. We're getting back in touch with nature, and nature is providing for us. And that's such a connection. One just feels better. And study after academic study shows that being in a green space, whether it's your own garden or a public park, is good for you psychologically and physically. So gardens are a haven. They are this retreat and escape, and they're just beautiful. They're places where we can enjoy not just ourselves. It's not about being selfish. Of course, it's lovely to sit there and smell the flowers, enjoy the sunset, but it's also a place where we can be sociable. We can bring our friends and our families together. We can have a barbecue outside. We can socialize. We can eat those lovely vegetables from the vegetable garden. But it's about that friendship. It's about being together. It's about the good things in life. And I think just want to finish on this one last slide, which is a lovely garden. This is in Italy on Ischia. It's Lord Walton's garden. And this was a garden that he and his wife made. So it was a labour of love, and it's just a haven. You go in there, the bottom garden is this shady retreat with water. It's actually quite Islamic inspired. There's a long rill with these lovely water features coming down there. And that was his garden. He liked that shady, watery, verdant retreat. Up the hillside was her garden. That's all about looking out over the Mediterranean with lots of Mediterranean flowers, a much drier landscape garden. But it was a place where they loved. They enjoyed creating it. It was their passion. They shared that passion. Different styles, but they shared the love of the garden. And both of them are buried in the garden. So again, it comes back to the idea of being a memorial. So gardens are a haven. They are a retreat. They're a place of spiritual sustenance. They're a place of spiritual investigation of yourself, a place of spiritual inward lookingness. It really is the garden within that we're looking for when we're within a garden.